So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it's been quite a while since we've been to Moria. Though we have been to Moria several times in the past, it's been good to have a bit of a break from it, to be honest, because it was an overly popular map once upon a time. You don't see it quite so much anymore, but now that enough time has passed, I feel as though a return to it is very, very warranted, because after all, I can see why it is so popular. It's definitely a very attrition-based fight, which often for the defenders can be quite satisfying if you set up your defensive positions nicely. But also, thematically, Moria has been fairly spot on for a while. There's a few things you could do to change the map around a little bit, but for the most part, the people who did the original 3rd Age got it fairly spot on, and it is going to be a good versus evil battle today as well. The dwarves are going to be joined by a faction of elves and Numenorians to try and help hold on to KHAZAD-DUM, while 5 attacking armies from the forces of evil will be trying to take Moria away from them. So, we shall start off with the player who sent me this battle replay, which is Misty70, so big thank you to him. He's going to be playing as Rhudaur. Now, the Hillmen have got certain good advantages that they can bring to bear against the dwarves and against the Numenorians as well, because of course they have quite a lot of armor piercing in their roster. Not for the Rhudaur marksmen, but the Rhudaur marksmen are a choice that I do quite like, because even though they won't outright win any skirmish fights against certainly not the elves, certainly not the Numenorians, and of course the dwarves of Erebor can also bring their crossbows to bear, they've got so much ammunition that you kind of need to destroy the unit entirely, otherwise they will be a constant little nagging pressure point on your defence. They won't be capable of doing tons and tons of damage, but they can be an annoyance, which to be fair is what you want from archers like this for the most part. We also have Witch Realm Enslavers, which, like I said, Rhudaur are very much a faction which has got a lot of armour piercing at their disposal, and the Witch Realm Enslavers are certainly the pinnacle of that when it comes to their melee capacity anyway. Very, very strong. We shall see how well they are used. Just in behind, we can see some upgraded Rhudaur clansmen, which I think is a good idea, because Rhudaur overall not quite as survivable as many other factions because of lower melee defense values and lower armor does make them a little bit fragile in some ways. The Rhudaur clansmen not so much though. With that chainmail they are more heavily armoured than most other Rhudaur infantry that you'll find, and also a very nice shield value means they won't be massacred quite so heavily by the archers, which will almost certainly be on display. Some Dunman spearmen in there as well, a lower tier unit of spearmen. Some Black Walls which are hiding. When they choose to be committed is going to be everything. Berserker class units, all of their survivability comes from having multiple HP, because they have very limited melee defense and next to no armor, so very much a limited shelf life on them, but if they are committed at the right time they could be absolutely devastating. Tyrannodyne Berserkers are here as well, a throwing projectile, and then they charge into melee and are also a very strong armor piercing infantry unit. Maybe not quite as show stopping as the Witch Realm Enslavers, but not too far behind, and that extra little ranged attack does give them a bit of utility, as well as of course wielding a shield. Speaking of which, shielded pikes are a bit of a rarity in the game for good reason, but the Tyrannodyne pikemen are one of the few units of pikes which does have a shield. They always tend to perform very well in melee as well, and in a siege battle like this, if you have pikes left at the end of the battle, that could be all important really. Trollshore Axe Throwers. Axe Throwers of course don't have the armor piercing of javelins, but they do have a higher base damage, really effective at breaking up pike blocks and defensive positions such as that if you don't have solid line infantry to back them up, so the defenders will need to be on the lookout for that. The Essenmoor's Troll Hunters Javelins of course don't really need to worry too much about that because they're armor piercing anyway, so they'll be capable of dishing out damage regardless. Heavily armoured as well by Rhudaur standards. And then a combination of some Rhudaur Swordsmen with some Rhudaur Axemen here on the side as well. So overall, fairly typical what you'd expect from Rhudaur, some armor piercing punch surrounded by some numerous very basic hillmen. And over on this side of the battlefield as well we have Gruul Wrangler, who's going to be playing as Angmar. Got some Angmar halberdiers here, very fragile. Angmar for the most part should make up for Rhudaur's overall lack of survivability with units such as this, the Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM with the armor upgrade, very, very nice. Some Angmar halberds here as well, 2 units of them. We've got more Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM, Angmar Marauders, Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM, so a fair amount of numbers here on the front, which is understandable. You're going to have to take losses on a map like Moria, especially given the quality of the defenders. Trolls of Gundabad, when they choose to be committed, is going to be the all-important once again. Orc Fellas, yes, they're armor piercing, but they are quite fragile, so while they will be somewhat useful in melee against factions like Numenor and Erebor, they'll have to get into melee without getting savaged by all of the projectiles coming their way. The Witchers. I'm sure that everyone is so pleased to see the Witchers here, but to be fair, on a map like Moria you'd be mad not to bring them really, because the punch that they offer is so strong. Snaga Stalkers, we've got some Angmar Marauders back here, we've got some Blackwatch Legion. Again, timing really is everything with a lot of these units that the attackers have. Because Moria is so constricting, you have to play that long game, have to try and wear the enemy down and then go all in at the critical moment, and the Blackwatch Legion may be one of the better tools that the attackers have over here for doing that. And finally, another unit of armor-piercing shock infantry, this one being the Witch Realm Hammer Guard. Over here, on the southern hills within the mountains, we have rather fittingly the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, played by the Dog Eater. That's a rather interesting name. Some more armor-piercing, albeit in a more basic way. The Heavy Goblin Spears, very useful to bring in a situation like this. Bolg's Champions gives them some mobility, which on Moria when you're inside the mines isn't as important, but you could still find a use for a unit like this, so it's perhaps for the best that the attackers do have that just in case. Better to have it and not necessarily need it. Certainly you don't have to worry quite so much as the attackers of not having enough infantry if you invest heavily in cavalry, especially as the Misty Mountains, because look at all of this, more spears and a ton of heavy goblin infantry as well, and that makes up this entire line. We've also got heavy goblin crossbows. You'd have to be crazy not to bring the heavy goblin crossbows in a situation like this, even if they just act as a lightning rod for all the ammunition that the enemy has coming towards them. That's something at least, but what you really want to be doing is getting some nice hits onto those really nasty defensive positions. Heavy Goblin Infantry, Goblin King's Bodyguard, a classic pick to put your general in. We've also got the Drake Broodlings, which yes, they're fast movers, so they can act kind of like cavalry as well, but they're also a bit of a battering ram through infantry positions, so the mass here could be important, but again, when you choose to commit them is going to be really, really important, because if you commit them too soon, they're going to get bogged down in infantry and get carved apart very quickly. You need to keep them moving, easier said than done in a map that's as constricting as Moria. And then we have the White Orc Fearmongers, a nice unit of armor-piercing phalanx infantry. Now, moving on to the fourth attacking army, we have John Odinson, who is playing as Umbar, a bit of quality injected in, I would imagine. Some upgraded Balagai pikes. Can't imagine that armor upgrade will help them too much against the armor-piercing arrows of Numenor, the just outright high base damage arrows of Lothlorien, and the crossbow bolts of Erebor, but at the very least it'll make them a little bit tankier in melee. Naru Naaru Royal Guard, very heavy archers, very capable in a long-range skirmish fight. Balaketh Axe Guard, going in for some of that armour piercing that Umbar can bring to the table, which is understandable given the defenders on display. Balaketh Shield Bearers as well. None of these Balaketh units have got the armour upgrade, but sometimes you need to make some sacrifice if you're on the attack. You can't afford to just spend money on absolutely everything. More armour piercing as well. A fair few units of Alcarondas Legion as well, so Umbar will be bringing some good quality to the table. They'll probably be the best positioned attacking faction anyway to stand up to the defenders' overall qualities. The Belagair Archers, again for that skirmish fight goodness. And finally back here, General's Bodyguard, Harbingers of Castamere. And the final attacking army we have on display today is going to be the Haradrim, played by Source. So again, I'm expecting a lot of armour piercing, much like Rhudaur. We've got the Muhard Beast Tamers for a phalanx, starting off with the Muhard Berserkers as well with a bit of armour piercing, those bone clubs acting as armour piercing two-handers. Dismounted Serpent Guard offer a little bit of quality, Southron Warband with yet more armour piercing, more Berserkers, the Trollmen, which you always will see as Harad, and they will be useful here, standard Trollmen, and the Champions of Nafrat of course being the Bodyguard tier option. Berserkers, a catapult could actually be a vital pick for Harad. If they can get some good shots in the tight corridors of KHAZAD-DUM, then that could be really, really important. But again, when will they choose to commit that? Southron Archers, some Muhard Beast Hunters as well for those javelins, some Muhard Beast Tamers, and some Dismounted Serpent Guard. So now, we shall move on to the defenders, starting off over here. We've got Mac, who's playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. He's actually got some cavalry, which is surprising. The Ironfoot War Goats don't exactly come cheap. And when will they choose to use? Again, I've said that so often in this battle, but with Moria being what it is, it's all just a matter of when you choose to commit stuff. Will the War Goats try to charge out of the gates right from the off? It would be a bold move to do so. Umbar's javelins, and I say javelins, they have, well, all of their javelin units can hide, to be fair, but All of their archers will be waiting for them. Some dwarven miners, the cheapest unit of Erebor, so perhaps trying to invest more heavily in other areas. Perhaps this is the cost of bringing some cavalry. In order to fill out your roster entirely, you need to pad it a little bit with miners, which have a bit of armour piercing to them, but they will struggle against Umbar's infantry quality. Ironfoot halberdiers will offer that front line that you want, armour piercing, backed up by the Numenor variant of the Balaguer pikemen. Medexus commanding them, no armour upgrade on them, interestingly enough. Across the way as well, across the bridge of KHAZAD-DUM, the Pharazim Swordmasters, a truly scary unit of infantry, 3 hit points, absolutely devastating. Ironfoot crossbows ready on the hill, nasty defensive position to try and force your way through here, but there are 3 armies they shall have to deal with over here. We have some Lothlorien archers, some Kerin Amroth rangers and a dwarven catapult, a nasty triumvirate of skirmishes there, and it doesn't stop there. Ironfoot crossbows, Erebor legionaries as well, unit of heavy dwarven line infantry, heavy elven line infantry as well with the Lothlorien axemen. As you would expect in a 5v3, the defenders not lacking for quality. Axguard of Erebor, Highborns of Erebor, the body-piercing crossbow bolts of the Blacklock engineers, Ironfoot axe throwers, and some more Erebor legionaries. Before we go into the town centre, is there anything up here? Indeed there is. We've got some Balaguer pikemen from Medexus, we've got some Lothlorien mounted company from Hidden, I should say, who is playing as Lothlorien, some more Ironfoot crossbows, some more axe throwers, so plenty of Ironfoot units here for the dwarves, so definitely going for that more numerous approach, perhaps to fit around the more skirmish heavy approach that Lothlorien are likely to take, but also Numenor. Ironfoot spears as well, so plenty of dwarven infantry guarding that particular approach. And over here we have the General's bodyguard today. Is that the General? No, it isn't. No General in here, but it is the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, a devastating unit. Riders of the Goldenwood with their Silverthorn arrows, a ton of heavier elven units once again, Lothlorien spearmen, Lothlorien swordmasters. I can see the Karas Galadon's guardians in there as well. Woodland protectors, more javelins of course, the Watchers of the Goldenwood, and some more Ironfoot spears. Just having a cursory glance, I cannot see the red capes. Ah, there they are. The Kindred of Celeborn. I was wondering if they would be back here, and they do have it's the standard model for the Kindred of Celeborn, not with the armour upgrade, which does give them the red capes and the slightly more high definition armour. And then Medexus, Ardenheim Shadowbows, we have some Lothlorien warriors, Spears of the Wood, Galathrun Blade Masters, so some lighter units over here. I'd assume we're going to see the bulk of Numenor's army over here, seeing as we haven't seen much of them yet. Naruna Iron Royal Guard are here, Numenorian cohort, there we go. Some Balaguer archers, some more elves also backing them up, some Lothlorien archers, the armour-piercing and Numenorian shield guard, which should be quite useful against Angmar as they approach from this direction, but less so Rhudaur. Balaguer archers also over here, Seafarers of Nindamos, Balaguer footmen, and then a blob once again of Numenorian infantry, including Seafarers, Shield Guard once again, Naruna sentinels. I can see the golden armour of the Royal Legion of Armenelos in there, and more Shield Guard and cohort as well with those swords and spears, as we can see. Now, I will make a little bit of a cut here. It could actually be a very short cut of only 100 or 200 frames if the Dwarven Cavalry decides to charge out immediately. But if they don't, it will probably be a case of the attackers coordinating their efforts. The armies that start off in front of the gates will likely wait for their allies to close in so they can have a more comprehensive assault, which is the wise idea. So really it's up to the defenders how quickly we get going here. Irregardless, it is a 50k frames battle, so there's no danger of it being over in a flash. So yeah, I'll make a little bit of a cut here, and we'll rejoin when the battle is beginning. So the gates of Moria are about to fall, as the hillmen push forward what I would imagine to be a rather rickety ram to smash down these dwarven gates. It would probably take quite a while to do that under this sort of duress. And also over on the other side, you can see there that Umbar have decided to place their pikes right in front of the gate, perhaps as a direct response to all of the cavalry that's on the field. I didn't really mention this in the composition phase directly, but 3 units of cavalry, especially as expensive as Lothlorien and these dwarven cavalry riders tend to be, those are 3 units which take up the position that potentially could have been more elite infantry, which on a map like Moria perhaps would have been more useful, especially seeing as this cavalry didn't manage to escape the confines of the mines immediately. So they are going to have to try and operate within the more restricted pathways that make up a dwarven settlement. You can see here as well, looks like some arrows on the ground, perhaps from some archers that were left on fire at will in behind Doesn't look like any of the Elven nor Numenorian archers are continuing to fire, which is definitely a wise move. Gunmen Spearmen are not exactly the most high priority target there is, and Beastie 70 would undoubtedly be very pleased if they continued to garner the attentions of especially the Lothlorien archers. Not the sort of money that you want to be dumping into basic Gunmen Spears. Some Rhudaur marksmen also moving forward. Are they going to try and shoot through that rather narrow gap? They'd have an easier shot if they came in, though it would expose them as well to the defending archers. Either way, this is the sort of thing which might force some kind of response from the defenders. As the hillmen do indeed start to fire through, you can see several of the archers hitting the roof and the sides of the gate there. I'm not sure if that's the correct terminology when talking about a gatehouse like that, but Belagair archers are the target. Again, with their bucklers and with their better armour values, they would certainly win in a skirmish fight between the two units, but Rhudaur's goal here will not be to conquer their enemies with ranged power, at least with bows. Their goal will simply be to annoy the enemy enough to get them to use some of their resources on them. And they are now going to move into the gates, perhaps Beastie 70 sensing the fact that too much of his ammunition was being wasted into the gates there. Rhudaur marksmen getting into place, Dunman Spearmen acting as a buffer, albeit only one unit of Dunman Spearmen won't be enough to withstand a genuine counterattack from the Numenorians and the like. Meanwhile, over on the other side, not too much going on over here, although I say that, the Iron for Axe Throwers are over here and they are firing in as the Misty Mountains are the ones leading the way. Heavy Goblin Spears, their shields should be enough to withstand quite a lot of punishment, and the Goblin Infantry are not important enough for the Misty Mountains to care if they absorb some of those rather deadly throwing axes from Erebor. Once again, just testing the waters a little bit here, it feels, because they aren't going to continuously fire over and over again. In fact, the Bolg's champions are moving forward. Also some arrows coming forth from across the way. So the defenders using some of their resources on some of their opponents' opening tests, which I think the attackers will be quite pleased with, to be honest, because clearly that is the intention here, both from Rhudaur on the other side and from the Misty Mountains over on this side. They don't intend to be pushing forward all that quickly. They want to be trying to bait the defenders into using some of their resources like this, and they're continuing to oblige them, you have to say. Axe throwers in particular, that's the sort of thing you don't want to be seeing used on something that is unworthy. Over here you can see the Rhudaur marksmen. Now that they're inside, this needs to be responded to, I would say, and the Belagair archers are the right unit to do that with, because they're not overly damaging themselves, but they will be really good in this back and forth that Rhudaur and Numenor have going on now. Rhudaur marksmen taking continuous damage. You can see the differences here in defensive prowess. The Rhudaur marksmen, with their rather poorly maintained padded gambesons, are not going to be up to the same sort of standard here as these more professional Numenorian regiments, and that goes to show in the differences between the kills. But this is ammunition that they will not have to deal with later on, and the Rhudaur marksman will not run out of ammunition, so as the unit gets lower and lower on its man count, and as they get harder and harder to hit as well, you will need to continuously fire at them if you are to gain the sort of advantage that clearly Numenor want to here. Dunman Spearmen in place. Rhudaur marksmen continuing to fire away. There are the Numenorian Shield Guard. Meanwhile, over on the other side, what do we have going on? Snaga skirmishers coming forward in response to this now as well, and they will be forcing the Iron for Axe Throwers back. They're taking some significant losses, you would say, to the Snaga skirmishers. Cheap javelins in the hands of the orcs, always an annoying thing to try and deal with. But the Dwarven miners are now moving forward, but are they following this up with anything? It doesn't look like it, so Mac is going to be throwing a unit of Dwarven miners under the bus effectively here. Yes, they're armour piercing, which will be useful against the heavier goblins, but they will be overwhelmed here, and they didn't even get a nice flat engagement against the line, which will allow the goblins to crash in from the sides, and that means these low melee defense Dwarven miners are going to be easy prey for the lowly goblins. Even the goblin infantry will likely be fairly efficient in this kind of engagement, which is never what you want to see. He was probably trying to act as a rearguard action so some of his units could get away, but I don't really think there was much need for that. And as in a 5v3 like this, you can't afford to be throwing. Even a unit of Dwarven miners can make the difference in the long run in a battle like this, and I really don't feel as though that was the most efficient thing that Matt could have done there. Still the Bolg's champions loitering around, hoping for some table scraps. From Southron Warbander here as well. Another armour-piercing spear, much in the same vein as the heavy goblin spears, of course. Meanwhile, over on the other side, this very much will be the shape of the battle, at least in the earlier stages of Moria, as it always is. The battles to really get in and establish, the battle for the attackers to really get in and establish themselves within Moria itself. Balagai footmen thinking about charging forward there, and with their armour upgrade, they are a superior spear to the Dunman spears, most certainly. But they think better of it. Medexus in the end deciding to pull back from that charge, which is a little bit strange because the Dunman spearmen are already shaken. You could try and get rid of them. And as a result, actually, Beastie 70, sensing the fact these Balagai footmen are a little bit disorganised now, going to try and get in there and prise them apart somewhat, although you will need to do more than just commit a single unit of lowly Dunman spears in order to achieve that. Snaga Stalkers back here, very much in the same vein as the Goblin infantry over on the other side, a fodder infantry unit, but everything will help here, and it's as you were once again. Still these Rhudaur marksmen, many of them now lie dead, but they're still firing away. You can see the differences in terms of body count though. There's that Numenorian armour and those bucklers really making the difference for the Balagai units here. The Lorien Mounted Company and looks like the Boar Ghosts there were trying to charge in to save these Dwarven miners, or at least make their sacrifice worthwhile, but with Bolg's champions and heavy goblin spears here, I really don't think that's the best idea again. Questionable judgment calls being made all round here, I would suggest. And the heavy goblin spears proving to be a very worthwhile addition here. Definitely the right vanguard to send forward for the goblins here, especially with the way that the defenders are approaching things. Lorenand archers firing from across the way. What are they firing at though? Again, heavy goblin spears. I mean, they're not a terrible unit, so killing them off will help, but by goblin standards, when you combine their armour and their shields, they can actually withstand a bit of a beating, albeit this is high quality elven arrows, so they will be doing the business. Again, goblin infantry and Snaga skirmishes coming forward, so they're very much taking the slow burn approach over on this side, the attackers, as it would appear they're doing over on this side. But it's good to see that the attackers have this unified approach. All the players don't have different designs on what they want to do. And when the attackers have got unified ideas like this, it can be difficult for the defenders, especially when they start making some questionable choices. It can be difficult for them to be victorious in this fight. Fortunately for them, however, Erebor, Numenor and Lothlorien all have the quality to see them over the line. Another volley coming in here, but again, this is a lot of ammunition which is now being used on a very depleted unit of Rhudaur marksmen, albeit now, with each volley they take, their routing becomes more and more likely, because it is a lot of damage they're taking, but ammunition supply, they're bound to still have lots of it. Over on the other side, meanwhile, still this cavalry loitering with intent. Hits coming from across the way again. Still the Lorenand archers firing away. I mean, yes, they're going to be getting kills, but is it worthwhile? Lorenand archers can be a useful tool in melee as well. Of course, heavy elven archers always tend to have that going for them. The goblin infantry still sticking out in front here, pulling out their hatchets and their curved swords. Snaga skirmishers, looks like they're trying to fire. It doesn't look like they have the ideal angle though. Only a few of their number are actually engaging. Crossbow bolts now as well, so this is a lot that is being committed forward. Of course, the Balagai archers over on the other side for Numenor, we saw how efficient they were over there. The same will also be true of the Umbar version of the same unit over here, as they will now start to fire across the way into those Lorenand archers and to the Ironfoot crossbows, both of which good armour, very high quality units, but everything will take damage if you focus it down for long enough. And that would appear to be, overall, what the attackers are going for, just in general. Meanwhile, on the outside of Moria, as we push our way in once more, still just the Dunman Spearmen, still just this one unit of Rhudaur marksmen trying to pick off one or two here and there where they can. The backs of the Numenorian shield guards are exposed, so you might get a few. We've got one, which is better than none, but no actual progress is being made, which is where the defenders can count themselves to have done a decent job. Like, the attackers are not actually making any progress, and nothing that important for the defenders as of yet has been lost entirely. Meanwhile, the bridge of KHAZAD-DUM, some elven cavalry charging across it. Still, these javelin men now throwing down onto that front line, which will surely mean a response has to be forthcoming. It looks in fact like the Elven Cavalry did try to be that response, but again, the problem is the spears are so close by that as soon as the cavalry charges in deeply enough, those spears are going to start to do damage. Even though the discrepancy in terms of the tier of unit is very wide, spears are always going to be something that cavalry is going to want to avoid. And Ironfoot halberds, taking some javelins here, dwarves are falling. This does demand a response as well, you know. Ironfoot Wargoat's going to charge up here as well, but they're going to suffer the same fate as the Elven Cavalry, I think. They do actually lurch forward and they do get a charge off, which is better than nothing, but they need to get out of here pretty quickly. Heavy Goblin Spear shaken up as a result of that heavy charge that Dwarven Cavalry is capable of, but again, you've got to be very, very careful. It's a dangerous game to play, but the attackers have done well so far, forcing the defenders into doing things that they really wouldn't want to. Orc fellas are moving forward, so Angmar are now coming in with some units to support the one unit of Dunman Spearmen that are here. Any more takers from Rhudaur? Doesn't look like it. Only basic Angmar units coming forward though, a single unit of Orc fellas, Angmar Marauders and Angmar Halberds. I mean, there's a Phalanx unit there, but there is also a Phalanx unit over here as well. The Belaguard Pikes will be able to outrange those Halberdiers from Angmar, and that is going to be a problem. So already you can see they are getting into position, fortifying this front line. Back there, Lorn-armed archers firing away, and why not? Angmar halberds are included here, and any elven arrow that hits one of those halberdiers is likely to result in a kill. Orc fellas as well certainly fit that bill. Halberdiers are rolling forwards. The Marauders are going to try and arrive there first to be that shield. Silverthorn arrows raining down from on high. From the Riders of the Golden Wood, is that? I mean, that will make the advance a little bit more awkward. It will make a mass push a little bit more difficult when you're sending individual unit models flying like that. But we do have a full-blooded infantry engagement for the first time in this battle. Angmar are the ones that are manning the front line for the time being. They will need a little bit of extra help, though, as the rank-and-file Numenorians should be able to hold this line, unless they start to push forward in greater numbers. The Dunman Spearmen, not quite what I had in mind. And we need something a little bit more heavy duty. Angmar could certainly provide that from their own ranks. More javelins raining down, and slowly but surely the dwarves are losing manpower here. Never a good sign. We're continuing to see the elven archers from across the way fire in here. They are scoring kills, that much cannot be denied. In fact, there's a crispy clump of goblin corpses there, which would imply that catapults even had a nibble at these goblins and Snaga that have made their way in this far to Moria. I like our archers, they're Bolg's champions, but the Bolg's champions don't really have a way in as of yet. If they charge down here, the Halberdiers will send them back the other way pretty quickly, so there's no need for that. Southron archers are there. Continuous fire from the crossbowmen. But this over here, much more like it from Rhudaur and Angmar. They're going to try and force the issue. Got some Rhudaur clansmen by the looks of things arriving on the front line. Indeed, you can see their distinctive shields. The Orc fellas providing a little bit of armor-piercing damage. And this is the kind of assault which will make the defenders sit up and take notice. Some Spears of the Wood from Lothlorien are coming in, but more importantly, the Pharazim Swordmasters have been committed fairly early, which I like. I like the fact that defenders are not shy about using their elite units here, because they may very well need them. Numenorian Shield Guard are here. More Numenorian Shield Guard. Plenty of line holding capabilities here. But with a big assault like this comes the increased attentions of all the archers that lie in behind. The Silverthorns in particular are going to be damaging, not only because of their base damage, but it will make the forward momentum of this push from the attackers a little bit less potent. That is a lot of arrows coming in, going after some Snaga Stalkers in behind. Or going after something in behind. I'd assume the Rhudaur Marksmen, in fact, and a second unit of Rhudaur Marksmen was committed forward, and very quickly, with several units of archers firing at them, you can see how poorly they fared. There's also some split shots coming in, so the Kindred of Celeborn are actually firing as well. I'm not sure whether I would recommend that, per se, but it is what it is. Meanwhile, Bolg's champions charging in. Once again, a unit of Dwarven Miners has been thrown under the bus a little bit here. They're going to try and go after the Snaga Stalkers on foot. I mean, if this was a better unit, or if this was the Dwarven Miners plus another unit of infantry, may not be the worst idea, because it would force the attackers into committing something a little bit more substantial forward, and that would of course give fantastic targets for the catapults and for the crossbows. The crossbows already looking like they want to fire. Belagair archers now out of ammunition, going to charge forward. Make sure that these miners run out of steam as quickly as possible. There's also heavy goblin infantry in large numbers on the field, of course, so it's unlikely you're going to be able to mulch your way through all of the attackers in this sort of situation quickly because of all of the goblins that are on display, going after their hated enemies in the dwarves. But you can see here the Ironfoot crossbows in a nice position to shoot, but are they shooting at the best targets? We'll have to wait and see. Meanwhile, once again, in the roof of Moria, there is a bit of momentum here going on for the attackers. I don't see an awful lot of quality, mind you. I think if they had a unit akin to sort of like the Witch-Realm Blackguard on the front line, which Angmar didn't seem to have brought, but something like the Enslavers or the Hammer Guard perhaps, just to really force the issue. Yes, they very much risk getting shot up by all of the archers that are on display, but it would really make this infantry start to struggle, you would imagine. Plenty of arrows hitting into the sides here as well. The pikes. With all of these heavy Numenorian units, it says that, well, it said for a moment there that defeat seems certain, but with the routing that's starting, in no small part due to all the arrows whistling overhead, it's not too surprising that the Numenorians, with some of the elven units as well, are gaining the upper hand here, although the Spears of the Wood not really designed for this kind of meat grinder in the same way as some of the more heavy-duty Numenorians are, albeit Galatharan Blade Masters in close proximity as well. Yeah, look, this is the problem with not having some quality interspersed with your fodder. This is going to happen. Like, this is a complete rout, in fact. Yeah, the chain rout begins, and this attack has completely fallen apart. And Angmar and Rhudaur are really trying to get away with only using their lower end units, and they were made to pay for it there, which is a shame because they had forward momentum. The Blackwatch Legion at that very moment could have been absolutely fantastic. We shall see. One of those units perpetually routing there, as we can see. Meanwhile, back near the bridge of KHAZAD-DUM, once again we can see these miners are still fighting. The cavalry, I'm really questioning its use at this point, or inclusion in the composition, because they're just mulching in here into the front line, and it hasn't really worked out for them as of the moment, I must say. There's also Blackback Mountain Berserkers on the front line. I mean, if any time was there to use skirmishes, now would be the time. Blackback Berserkers, definitely the sort of thing you want to try and shoot up. They're surrounded as well by plentiful support, maybe lower tier support, but these miners are not long for this world. Throwing axes are coming in, not the worst thing at all to use against Blackback Berserkers though. Certainly better than using them on Goblin Infantry as we saw earlier on. Some Haradrim archers in behind offering some support for this push. Going to fire across the river. River, I should say, chasm, of course. Still these throwing axes fire. Ironfoot halberds backed up by Ironfoot crossbows making up the secondary line, and as the goblins spill forward in and around what very little of that dwarven miners unit remains, they will start to collide with this dwarven front line as the throwing axes continue to whiz overhead. And the goblins continue to charge down the hill. And with the blackbacks, they will need more. There are halberds, they have enough in the way of long weaponry to try and hold on here. They will need to continue to do that. Meanwhile, over here, the second wave of the assault is now underway. Rhudaur are taking the lead, this time with some Rhudaur clansmen, sensing that they need a little bit more on the front line. This time they have sent forward some Black Wolves, they are sending forward the Guardians of Kharn, units that would have been really useful in the last assault had they been committed forward slightly sooner. But all is not lost. They can afford to play the long game here, the attackers. They can afford a few setbacks in ways that the defenders simply cannot, due to the discrepancy in terms of numbers that we're seeing. Galatharan Blade Masters running around trying to dodge the arrows from overhead. All of those units still perpetually routing. It looks like a more impressive assault than it actually is as a result of all of those routing units, in fact. Belagair archers. Seafarers of Nindamos getting into position. Are we going to see some javelin action from Numenor before we see it from Rhudaur? It does look as though that is going to be the case, but that is also going to convince the Trollshot Axos, who are under heavy attack from the Belagair archers, you would have to say, but Trollshaw Axeros won't be that bad against the Seafarers either, hitting the side of this infantry column. Lothlorien Blade Masters moving in. Over here, meanwhile, ooh, that looks like a most unfortunate catapult hit right into the heart of the dwarves' own defensive line, but they also managed to hit squarely where the blackbacks are, and the blackbacks actually seem to have taken a lot of damage. Axe throwers are nearby, crossbows are nearby, and the catapult has hit them by the looks of things, so it isn't too surprising in the grand scheme of things. Not sure why the frame rate seems to be taking a nosedive, that's a little bit unfortunate. Balakith's shield bearers on the front line adding a little bit more AP to proceedings. Defeat is a distinct possibility. Although perhaps I shouldn't be too surprised about the diving frame rates when there's a lot of skirmishers doing their grisly work. Ironfoot crossbows still, I mean there's plenty of targets they can go after, and this is where the defenders really need to make it count. I don't disagree with the use of the catapult here, honestly, it's just rotten luck that they hit the side of those Ironfoot halberds. Meanwhile, over on this side, Trollshaw Axeros continuing to do their thing. Guardians of KHAZAD-DUM, defeat seems certain, only a military genius could win this battle. A large part of that, surely, is the fact that they're being hit by the Seafarers, and also the fact they're going after the armor-piercing spears and the Numenorian shield guard. More is still needed on this front line from Angmar and Rhudaur, but there are only 2 armies for the attackers over here. On the other side there are 3, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that the attackers are finding it harder going over here. Having said that, this is the side of the battlefield I would rather be on if I were the attackers. There's more room to manoeuvre once you get past this initial gateway here, which is why I would have been more aggressive earlier on, committing Blackwatch Legion perhaps to push through that initial defence. It would have at the very least made the attackers panic a little bit more. Whereas over here, the slow and steady approach has worked very nicely for the attackers, I would say. They continue to push forward, Belagire archers and heavy goblin crossbows shooting directly down into the front line. Again though, not shy about committing elite units forward. There are highborns of Erebor making their way to the front line, and you have to appreciate that. Down come the Balakith shield bearers. Continuous raining crossbow bolts here though. Hard berserkers. There's still plentiful halberdiers on the front. Well, I say plentiful. Yeah, I mean there's enough halberdiers to be a problem for the attackers. The goblins and the black Numenorians continue to try and push their way through the dwarves, but the defenders really eager to hold on to these initial choke points, aren't they? Because Lothlorien Axeman being committed forward now, 78 of them. Heavy elven infantry in addition to the heavy dwarven infantry and the bodyguard dwarven infantry as well is a bold thing. But we saw it in the last battle on Thranduil's Halls, the last large-scale siege battle. Knowing when to retreat is really important, and they just about got away with it in that battle. They retreated at the right time. They need to know when it becomes less of an attractive proposition as we motor our way through, just having a little look at all of the reserves the defenders have in place. And then over here, continuous assault coming in, some Rhudaur swordsmen adding themselves to the front line now, so keeping the fires stoked. This is a classic warrior siege in many ways, with it being a very slow burn of a battle. 50,000 frames as well though, so perhaps we shouldn't be all that surprised. There are some Trollshaw Axeros in behind. Snaga skirmishers are there also. There's a lot of Numenorian infantry still here though, as well as some elven units, some Lothlorien warriors in fact, so some heavy elven axemen ready to commit themselves in. Perhaps if Angmar commits a little bit more heavily, those heavy elven axemen will be vital. Meanwhile, some routing Snaga who are being carved apart by the Lothlorien Blade Masters on their way through, and also out of ammunition Belagire archers, just making sure that the defensive line maintains its rigidity. Back over to the bridge of KHAZAD-DUM, more units being committed, albeit again more out of ammunition crossbows just to try and make the line maintain its strength. Oof. Some hits from the catapult there right into the centre of the heavy goblin crossmen, a grazing hit on the Belagire archers as well. Not a terrible thing by any means. The Harad javelins hitting this blob of Ironfoot infantry. The dwarves need to recognise that as a threat. I mean, this is why it's difficult to maintain this defensive position, such as it is. Very, very difficult. because you can become exposed to the attackers, and if you allow the attackers to get their ranged units to be efficient, it's always going to be pretty tricky for you. Watchers of the Goldenwood firing away also. Catapult going to fire again here. Will they be able to pour the punishment on along with the Watchers of the Goldenwood? Two of the shots going wide, one of them getting a decent hit on the Muhab Beast Hunters, but I'm sure that the Dwarves would have hoped for more from that particular volley. Over here, meanwhile, we really haven't seen much change at all. Rhudaur and Angmar have been held at bay so far by the primarily Numenorian with a few Elven units sprinkled in defensive line. Elven swordsmen in and amongst all of the more regimented and heavier units from Numenor. Numenor perhaps hoping to score some of that Dwarven Mithril to make their armour from, in exchange for their assistance on the front line here. Angmar Halberds pushing their way forward. That armour piercing will be helpful, but is there enough quality? 50 Blackwolds, which Numenor won't like fighting the Blackwolds, but still a few units back here. Trollshort Axe Throwers. Still those Rhudaur Marksmen are alive, still firing as well. The amount of damage they will be doing is ultimately minimal, but still. Having a look here at the heart of the defence. Riders of the Goldenwood, still reinforcements that could be committed forward, should it be required. Ironfoot Spears, Woodland Protectors. We're going to see the catapult used again, I think, because, yeah, just at the right time as well. Right into the bowels of this position. Mostly Spears and Berserkers. They actually missed the Alcarondas Legion for the most part, which they will be displeased about, but the amount of kills certainly quite impressive there. Now we have another unit of Dwarven Infantry on the way. Ironfoot Spears really eager to hold on to this little hill. But now Corsair Fencers, there you go, the armour-piercing throwing daggers being utilised. And they are going to cut those dwarves down to size as if that was required. As they continue to make their way, push their way forwards, I should say. Still some more axe throwers. I mean, they could commit even more if they wanted to this front line, but I think this is the moment, much like the Thranduil's Halls replay we saw last time out, this is the moment where I would consider pulling back. Or start pulling things back, start pulling your more important units back, such as the Highborns of Erebor, who still have 33 left. They've been fighting hard on this front line, showing their quality most certainly. But the time might have come to pull back a little bit. Think about defending some other points. Maybe not splitting your attentions between the high ground and the bridge of KHAZAD-DUM here. Maybe going all the way back to the Hall of Pillars over here, centering your defence around the town centre, at least on this side. Over here, though, it's a little bit more questionable. You could continue to hold the line as you were. Rhudaur clansmen pushing in, but how much longer is this going to last? I mean, if the Pharazim Swordmasters commit themselves, this still isn't going to be enough, you would suggest. Over here, meanwhile, and you can see Angmar actually pulling back outside. They still have reinforcements, plenty of them. The Witches are still there as well. A worrying thing indeed. But I can understand why they're being a little bit more conservative over here, because there's only two armies. If they get it wrong, then it will go badly wrong for them over on that side. And as a result, the domino effect could mean that the three armies over here have to face the entirety of the defence all on their lonesome. And that most certainly is not what you want to see. We still have a lot going on over here though. Narina Erebor Guard, load of heavy Umbar units, still plenty of goblins out here as well. And the Haradrim. Still some Trollmen of Harad here, the Serpent's Fangs, Demons of the Desert, another weapon of extreme destruction. So, unfortunately, the rest of this battle is going to be curtailed somewhat because I have run into some rather worrying technical difficulties, which I really hope are just the result of this replay file being a bit weird, rather than anything slightly more sinister, because, unfortunately, this replay has been causing crashes, and not just the usual crashes to the desktop either. I mean, completely crashing the computer and causing it to restart, which is somewhat worrying. Now, the slightly reassuring thing is the fact that this did seem to happen at more or less exactly the same time when I was recording it both times. and I did have the foresight to actually break up the recording the second time around just in case, so I did actually manage to show you at least the first part of this battle, and I will be able to show you the second part of this battle through these little snippets that I'm showing on the screen now. And effectively, as you can see, the defensive lines do hold for a little bit longer, but in my opinion the defenders do stick around in the outer defences a little bit too long, especially on the side where the bridge of KHAZAD-DUM is concerned, and eventually they do get pushed back to the town centre. They don't also then fall back also from the Rhudaur Angmar front line, so they're a little bit stretched there, and eventually, as I'm sure you will see, this does lead to the attackers killing them piecemeal in different parts of the map, even though it is a very, very close battle. And I do believe the defenders, if they had been slightly more, if they'd been slightly less gung-ho about defending the outer reaches, and if they had also been a little bit more unified in their response, their quality should have actually been enough to see them over the line here with stuff like their rangers, their Blacklock engineers, all of their very good archers, and also their infantry just being of higher quality. This battle was theirs for the taking, but unfortunately it's all a matter of those little moments of judgment, which unfortunately for them, they weren't able to quite get right, and the attackers playing it very much by the book. A slower burn, this one certainly, but in the end they were victorious, albeit by a very narrow margin, as I'm sure you will see. Regardless of that, it is of course slightly worrying that this did turn out to be the case. Now, the next replay I will be doing is another scenario from Reforged. If I get the same problems where it completely crashes and effectively auto restarts my computer, that would lead me to believe that it's a hardware problem, which is of course very concerning, because it means that because of the schedule being what it, well, to be fair, I'm recording this shortly before the week where I intend to do a live stream channel update where I will talk about this in perhaps a little bit more detail. But if it is a hardware problem, that is a big issue with regards to the channel moving forwards, especially in, maybe not immediately noticeable, but it will be as summer goes on. So I really, really hope that that is not the case, and I hope that it's just a case that this replay is a little bit weird. Moria is quite a demanding map with all of the projectiles that are going around, so I'm hoping that that's the case. If it's not, there may be problems, but we'll see. It's not Beastie 70's fault, but it is what it is. Irregardless, we will be moving forward, as I'm sure you're seeing that I'm trying to do the best at showing the battle in the ways I can, because I don't want this one to completely go to waste, because it is a very good example of Moria fight. So I'm going to be showing these little snippets, and we will then be going through the results screen at the end.
Men have taken control of the castle.
So here we are, the heroic music blaring in the background, at least from my perspective. We have the forces of evil be victorious, but again, it was so close. It was within grasp for the defenders here to be victorious. It was just them being a little bit too eager to defend those outer reaches, I think. The knife edge, the difference between the Thranduil's Halls replay previously and this one is the fact that eventually the defenders on Thranduil's Halls did decide to move backwards and know when their time was up on the initial defences. That was not the case here. And that's really the main difference, I would say. Also, the fact those 3 units of cavalry, I mean, the Riders of the Golden Wood were useful over the course of the battle, to be fair, with their Silverthorn arrows, but the Goat Cavalry from Erebor and the Lorenan Mounted Company from Lothlorien really weren't all that useful, to be brutally honest, and they would have been far better served having perhaps another unit of heavy infantry for the dwarves, another unit of skirmishes perhaps for the elves, and that would have been enough to make a big difference, I think. But it is what it is. I do think the attackers were deserving victors in the end because they went for that slower approach, and ultimately it did pay off because they lulled the defenders into staying on those front lines for longer than they otherwise would, I think. And ultimately they also ended up lulling them into using quite a lot of their ammunition earlier, which would have been much more useful later on. So let's see what did the damage for Beastie 70. Which Roman Slavers doing well when they were committed late on. Franadine Berserkers also. When that quality came forward for Rhudaur, when the defence was looking a little bit tired in the outer reaches there, that's when this quality really came home to roost. Ettenmoor's Troll Hunters also doing quite well, but a lot of these units not quite so well. Those Troll Axeros in the end did actually rack up a decent kill count for themselves, even though they were being focused down, so good micro of that individual unit there, but obviously most of the infantry was always going to struggle against a high quality Numenorian and Elven front line as it was over on that side of Moria. The Misty Mountains also doing quite well, their numbers really proving to be incredibly useful over on the bridge of KHAZAD-DUM, but also their individual units of quality, some good opportunistic charges as well from the Bolgs champions, so really nothing to complain about there. And Umbar, to be fair, they were the ones with the most left over at the end, I would say, so they were committed later on. But being in a more supporting role is something that sometimes you have to do as the attackers. So yes, my apologies that this replay wasn't quite the cinematic experience in the second half as it really should have been, and deserved to be in many ways, but to be honest with you, I'm less frustrated and more worried about that, because like I said, that could be the sort of thing which dramatically impacts my ability to actually record things. I really hope that my PC is not giving up on me in that respect. The thing that gives me hope is the fact that it was in pretty much exactly the same point when I was recording with the settings up high. You may have noticed in the little snippets I turned the settings down to not at the basement, but lower, certainly. So it's my hope that it's just a matter of this replay being either A, very demanding, or B, something being wrong with it. But we shall see. I think the next replay will be quite telling about that. I'll go into a little bit more detail on what this could mean, I think, I will have gone into more detail on what this could mean in the live stream or pre-recorded channel update that I will be doing, which will have been out in May. This replay, of course, not coming out until mid-June-ish, I believe. But yeah, worrying, to say the least, because, again, with my schedule, if my PC starts to be on the fritz, that's a problem in a number of ways, actually, so I really do hope that that is not the case. I'm sure that I will find a way around it. I can't really afford to be buying a whole new PC at this point, though. It's the sort of thing that I did have penciled in for later in the year when I was a little bit more stable. But it's not the sort of thing that I can afford to do so soon after moving into my new accommodation. Things are a little bit on a knife edge in those terms at the moment as well, so it's worrying. But again, not Beastie 70's fault by any means, especially if it's my PC. Even if it's the replay itself, again, not really his fault. I'm hoping that it's just a matter of Moria being what it is, and we shall see moving forward. But irregardless, it was a very good example of Moria, and it's nice to be back on the map, even if it didn't quite turn out the way I was hoping in the end. So yeah, big thank you to Beastie 70 for sending this replay to me. Big thank you to all of the players for being involved. As I said, the next replay will be a scenario sent to me by... what was that player's name again? Theran, I believe. He made a custom scenario, and I will be showcasing that, and hopefully we won't be seeing the same technical issues that plagued this particular replay. Irregardless, it is what it is. I hope you enjoyed this for what it was, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.